Back in September, the Dreamcast celebrated its 23rd birthday, well, at least in North America, and I figured that I should share some of my memories of the console. The focus of most conversations surrounding the Dreamcast has always been its failure, that it was nearly dead on arrival. Reeling from the failure of the Saturn, the Dreamcast was the all-or-nothing play that Sega needed to succeed, but would ultimately never be able to grow into its full potential with the PlayStation 2 delivering its death sentence a year later. Despite its failure, it's always been one of my favorite consoles. With the library hosting some of gaming's most iconic hits, I've always felt that it was kind of underappreciated for what it delivered to the gaming world. I know the intro of this video likely comes across a little bittersweet, but that's about to change. So in pure Jot Shot fashion, it's time to roll back to when I was a little Jot. So the Dreamcast's North American launch was September 9th, 1999. I think that puts me at being in like maybe first grade. I don't really fucking know. I'm old as shit now. But hey, I guess like it doesn't really matter because I didn't even have mine at launch. Prior to the launch of the Dreamcast, my only exposure to Sega consoles was the Genesis 3 I had gotten in '98. And with being so late to the party, I was getting a crash course of the games I missed out on. Of course, one of the major ones being Sonic. Like I've discussed in previous videos, I had a pretty big Sonic obsession as a little dude, so when I started seeing ads and articles and promos for Sonic Adventure in the Dreamcast, you know my little brain was going, man, I need one of these. The Dreamcast launch came, and I would only really get to play display units at Funkoland and Toys R Us. None of my friends or classmates had a Dreamcast, so I didn't really get to experience it in a social setting. Even though I didn't get to check the Dreamcast out at a friend's house, my experiences getting to play the console were kinda unique. There was a Wizards of the Coast shop I would frequent to play the Pokemon trading card game, and it had a LAN cafe where you could pay to play games by the hour. They had all the newer consoles and 2 walls of computers, so when I found out they had a Dreamcast, I begged my dad to let me try it. After multiple trips and hearing me talk about it non-stop, my dad finally caved. We walked up to the counter, asked for the hour, and I got to pick from a small selection of games. If I recall correctly, they had like Crazy Taxi, Soul Calibur, Resident Evil Code Veronica, and of course Sonic Adventure. You can already guess what I picked. This would be the first time I really got to sit down and enjoy the console for more than 5 minutes at a kiosk. The boot up screen, the controller, the loud roar of Open Your Heart's opening riff blasting my ears off. I was practically drooling, and it only got worse as I got to the gameplay. When the time was up, my dad had to just pry me away. I had already been buying into the Dreamcast hype before this moment, but this really sealed the deal on how much I wanted one. With my parents being separated at the time, a Dreamcast was a little bit too hefty of an investment, so I'd have to keep waiting. That was until I found out that a local video store actually had a service where customers could rent consoles for a week. We couldn't afford to buy a Dreamcast outright, but my mom was able to let me rent one. We picked up the console and I grabbed a few games. Sonic Adventure wasn't available, but I did get to pick Crazy Taxi. You know, that's such an odd concept in hindsight, being able to just go to a video store and rent equipment. I think they might have rented out VCRs and shit too, but either way it was pretty rad. I miss video stores. Crazy Taxi, living up to its name, by far had one of the craziest presentations. Ridiculous gameplay concept, banging soundtrack, and of course, the wacky announcer. For the time, this game was in a league of its own, which feels more common with Dreamcast titles when I think about it. Every game kinda pushing boundaries in different means, but I don't want to get too into that yet. I did rent 2 other games, but I can't remember both of them. After a little digging, I was able to remember one of the games. Some game called Evolution: The World of Sacred Device. I only recognized the game because of the goofy looking anime dude with a robot arm. That shit sold me as a kid, but the gameplay itself really wasn't what I was looking for at the time, and I don't know if I really played enough of it to say that it was a good or bad game. It just kind of existed. We're gonna flash ahead a little bit to Christmas 2000, where I would finally get my very own Dreamcast. My mom had gotten me the Sega Sports Edition Dreamcast. With the standard Dreamcast being white, what made this console unique was that it was black. It had a Sega Sports branding on the lid, and it came with a black controller and 2 games, NBA 2K and NFL 2K. This shit was so exciting because I didn't just have a Dreamcast, I had a special variant Dreamcast, and that made the wait even more worth it. The only other game I remember being gifted with it was NHL 2K, and out of all the games I had gotten that Christmas, that was the most logical gift. Even though I wasn't super into sports as a whole, I had a huge appreciation for hockey, and we could partly blame that on the Mighty Ducks. A few days later, after Christmas, when I was with my dad, he had taken me to Funkoland where I got some of the games that I was missing. Sonic Adventure, Crazy Taxi, and I believe I picked up Trick Style because it was super cheap. Trick Style fucking sucked, but that was okay because I had Sonic Adventure. Eventually, I would also end up with a copy of Jet Set Radio, or as we originally had it, Jet Grind Radio, which, once again, was another leader of pushing boundaries in gaming. Unique visual presentation, top-notch soundtrack, iconic character designs, and like Crazy Taxi, pushing forward the rebellious vibe and angst of the new century. Nothing says, "Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me," quite like skating around the streets of Tokyo, making the world your amusement park and painting on whatever the fuck you feel like. It was a game that felt, and still feels like, the ultimate freedom of expression. The Dreamcast was about abandoning the normal and carving into a world hungry for change. We didn't want 2D perspectives and characters that played it safe by the book. We didn't want plumbers and candy-coated bullshit. We wanted the type of shit that would make old folks uncomfortable. Every console at the time was kind of trying to do that, but the Dreamcast was the one that always resonated the strongest with me. We'd see this sort of attitude carried forward with the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox. Gaming wasn't just about selling to little kids for quarters anymore. It was about providing entertainment with a broader sense of unlimited possibility. Speaking of unlimited possibility, there's still some other games and memories I'd like to cover, so let's just move ahead. Even though I've never really been super great at them, I've always had a big appreciation for fighting games. And the Dreamcast had one of the best fighting game lineups. Soul Calibur, JoJo, Dead or Alive 2, Garo, Mark of the Wolves, Third Strike, and most importantly, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Man, and I really don't need to say much about Marvel vs. Capcom 2 because it's a game that really does need no introduction. It's one of the most universally praised games of all time. Everyone fucking loves that game. And for some reason, if you haven't played Marvel vs. Capcom 2, grab a friend and go find a way to play that shit. And don't worry, if you don't got friends, the solo is pretty fun too. And coming back to that list, another great title was Dead or Alive 2. I never knew what the fuck I was doing, but man, I could spend hours just mashing people into walls to see ring outs and stage transitions. I think back when I was like maybe 9 years old, my cousin came from out of state and we stayed up until about 4 in the morning just lost in Dead or Alive. Neither of us were really good at it, but we were having the best fucking time. During that same visit, there was another night where we played a different game, Dynamite Cop. The thing with Dynamite Cop is that it took the concept of beat-em-ups like Streets of Rage and cranked it to 11. It was designed as a quarter drainer because it was an arcade port, but you and a co-op partner pick from a selection of 3 different characters and just go to town beating the fuck out of pirates to save a politician's daughter. I was a big fan of games like Fighting Force from the PS1, so this game was a very easy choice for me. So when I was recording footage for the video, I did a little bit of a stream and I played like some of these games, and a lot of people saw Dynamite Cop for the very first time and they were just super hooked on it and they didn't know about it. So I'm curious about how many people actually know about this game. My cousin and I still talk to this day about those experiences with the Dreamcast, and the shit was literally 20 years ago. I love the world of modern online gaming and new co-op experiences, but I don't think anything can really replace the classic couch co-op multiplayer moments. And yeah, even though the Dreamcast did have online capabilities, I never really got to use any of it. Another standout title for me personally was Gundam Side Story 0079 Rise from the Ashes, which I don't think is really a shocker if anyone knows my interests, but this shit was so exciting to me because I was in the era of being a new Gundam fan, you know, with Gundam Wing coming out around that time in the States. So I would take whatever was thrown at me. I thought it was sick to see a game where you piloted the Gundam with a first-person view of the cockpit, and I was fucking trash at the game. But seeing one of my favorite anime get a cool game treatment was awesome. So I actually have 2 side notes about this game. One of them is that I tried to play the game on stream for the first time since I was a kid, and I can confirm that I am still absolutely trash at it. Maybe the game didn't age as well as I thought it did, but it was still fun to go back and try to play it. Also, the GM Sniper White Dingo that you play like near the end of the game is still one of the coolest mobile suit designs. It goes hard as fuck. Now, for everything cool that the Dreamcast had going, it had, great games, cool memory card gimmick, and online capabilities. It really had its share of curses as well. One of the things that always comes to my mind was the inclusion of the DVD player in the PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2 came in at $299 versus the Dreamcast's $199 price point. You could spend the extra cash and have a home entertainment system, especially at a time where DVD players were so obnoxiously expensive. Prior to the launch of the PS2, it was basically spend $400 to get a DVD player, so having everything at once for the price of $300 was a no-brainer. It was kind of similar to how it was cheaper to buy a PlayStation 3 at launch than to buy a Blu-ray player. Something that I think might have been even deadlier for the Dreamcast was the ease of piracy. The Dreamcast used the newly developed GD-ROM, or Gigabyte Disk Read-Only Memory, in an attempt to safeguard the console against piracy. Toting more storage space than the CD-ROM, the idea was that more space and creating a new format would help eliminate the threat of piracy. And what bootleggers quickly found out was that the MIL CD, or Music Interactive Live Compact Disc, features could be exploited to play pirated games. Even if a standard CD was too small to hold the data of a GD-ROM, they would just remove files or features and one could play the games through illegal means. This feature would eventually be fixed in later editions of the console, but bootleggers also quickly developed other means to play the pirated software through boot-up discs. It was as simple as putting in one disc, letting the console recognize, and then swap discs to play the desired game. Now, something else was that Dreamcast games ran from $39 to $49.99, which was actually kind of fairly priced compared to the N64's games, which were closer to $70. But even with the fair pricing, folks could either spend $40 on one game retail or just go buy a pack of CDs and end up with a whole library if you had the means. Hell, I'm sure folks who didn't even have the means to do so could just go to the flea market and drop $30 and come home with like 6 games. And I'll tell you straight up, I've witnessed a fair amount of pirated Dreamcast games, and virtually everyone I know that owned a Dreamcast has or had a few. So between the hype for the PlayStation 2, the lack of the DVD drive, and the piracy situation, the Dreamcast was kinda doomed to fail at the gate. But hey, Sega gave it one hell of a last try for the console market. I know I only spotlighted a few games from the library in this video, but folks shouldn't forget about the other bangers like Shenmue, Power Stone 2, Space Channel 5, Skies of Arcadia, and of course, motherfucking Seaman. I'm sure there's some I'm missing here that folks really love, but hey, you can always let me know in the comments down below, and of course, I'd love to read your memories of the Dreamcast as well. These days, it feels like the Dreamcast gets a lot of love. There's a whole younger generation of folks that long for the library and aesthetic of something that they didn't get to live through. And if the Dreamcast had all of this love back in the day, it might have had a little extension to its life cycle. Even if the Dreamcast did get the extra support, I'm certain it still would have lost to the PlayStation 2, but it's nice to imagine a world where it got to live for just a little bit longer. Even with all the odds stacked against it, I would say the Dreamcast definitely fell with grace. It was an honorable attempt to stay in the market, but it just couldn't do it. And the people that often speak poorly about the console, I think they just never really got to spend time with one, and that's a damn shame. I'll never expect folks to understand what made the console so special, but it was truly a you had to be there for it moment. At this point in time, a lot of the Dreamcast's bigger titles have been ported to PC, but at the cost of missing some of the things that made them whole. Different are missing music, missing images or branding. It's never the true deal, but I suppose that's why mods and emulation exist. Even if you do get to experience the games in a modern capacity, nothing beats the experience of booting up the real console and playing the games in their original states. Untouched, preserved, undisturbed time capsules of an era that once was. I've played and owned many consoles throughout my life, but the Dreamcast is the only console that I've ever regretted selling. By far one of the dumbest mistakes I've ever made. I don't know if it's just me getting older, or maybe it's me looking for a sense of nostalgia, but I can tell you I'd give anything to have that back. A few years ago, I'd gone to visit Moogie and we spent a whole afternoon revisiting some of our favorite titles, and it was just like we were kids again. Even with all the flaws and imperfections that the Dreamcast had, 20 years later, it still feels like home. and that's perfect to me. Thank you so much for taking a stroll down memory lane with me, and if you're new, please remember to like and subscribe. As a special thank you to all of my channel members, going forward, I'll be randomly selecting a different member at the end of each video to give a shout out. This video's shout out goes to Tony Spin-57, who I know just became a member the other day or got gifted one. If you'd like to have a chance to be selected for a shout out, or to just show your support, you can always become a channel member. This content would not be possible without my community's continued support. Until next time, please remember, no brain, just aim.